Hello and welcome to Simplified on PowerDrift, where we take complicated automotive ideas and break them down into something simple that you can digest easily. And today, we're digesting a topic that you have asked for at some point or the other, almost from the time that Simplified started here on this channel. We're talking about rev-matching or blip-shifting. Both are techniques which we use when you're downshifting, when you're going down the gearbox from 5th to 4th to 3rd to 2nd to 1st. And let's get right into it. But before we do, you know what to do, right? There's 4 buttons that you should really be hitting. So, downshifting on a sequential transmission is a little bit complicated because there is the potential for causing damage to the transmission, which is why we do use clutchless upshifts a lot, but we will never, almost never use downshifts without the clutch. But when it comes to downshifting, the problem is that the revs on the engine rise as you go down the gearbox for the same speed. And there you have a potential for disaster. This is because when your bike is running smoothly at, let's say, 50 kmph in 3rd gear and you downshift to 2nd, for a moment the wheel is going faster than the engine. It's trying to drive the engine, and if it can't drive the engine successfully, if let's say the engine is a heavy engine, it takes a while to spool up, there is an opportunity for the rear wheel to lock up completely. Locking up on its own isn't really a problem, but it represents a loss of control. And in that moment, your control over the motorcycle, your ability to accelerate, brake or change direction is completely hampered. And when you learn the technique of rev matching or blip shifting, this problem just goes away. Now, what I'm going to say next sounds complicated, but it's much easier to do on the motorcycle than to explain it on a video. The physical motions that you go through when you're rev matching is actually quite complicated for this hand initially while you learn, and after that it becomes second nature. And that is to be able to open the throttle, close the throttle and operate the brakes at the same time, because we're assuming that most of the time when you're downshifting, you're also on the brakes. The most extreme situation is you're at the racetrack, you're about to enter a corner and this is the braking phase. You are on the brakes, but you also need to get into the right gear for the exit. So there's a lot of activity happening in that narrow slice of time. Out on the street, the time is not that restricted, but the action remains the same. So what you're going to learn to do is take your right hand, you have your fingers operational, so you are actively squeezing the brake lever very hard at the racetrack, may not be so hard on the street. And at the same time, your throttle hand has to be able to move, create a blip, as in the revs rise and fall, that's called a blip. You should be able to blip the throttle and hit the brakes at the same time. Initially, you'll discover that when you do this, you manage to change the brake pressure and it can be quite uncomfortable, but that's the technique that you're trying to learn, where you can maintain a steady brake pressure while being able to move the rest of your hand and create a blip. But why are we doing this at all? And the reason we are doing this is because we're trying to match revs. Now, it sounds like a complicated term, but it's really simple if you think about it. So let's assume that for the purpose of this video, we have a motorcycle with a 2-speed gearbox, and I'm only using 2 speeds because it just simplifies the problem. It applies the exact same way to a 4, 5 or 6-speed gearbox. So let's assume that this motorcycle is able to do, say, 50 kmph in 1st gear and 2nd gear both. Let's say that in 1st gear, if you have to do 50 kmph on this motorcycle with the current gearing, it's going to sit at, let's say, 5000 rpm. If it does 5000 rpm in 1st, for the same speed, when you go up the gearbox, when you go into 2nd gear, the revs are going to drop. So let's say they drop to 4000 rpm. Now, this is an easy part of the process because as you go up the gearbox, as you go from 1st to 2nd, the amount of strain on the system reduces because the engine speed slows, although your physical speed as you travel through time and space remains roughly the same, right? But when you go back down into 1st gear, the amount of strain in the system is increasing because you're going from 4000 rpm to 5000 rpm. And remember, even a slow human being will still make a gear change in well under a second, which means the engine has to find it within itself to gain a full 1000 rpm in, let's say, about 0.6 or 0.7 of a second. Right? That's where the strain comes from, and that's where the idea of rev matching comes from. The idea is that when I go from 2nd to 1st, I go from 4000 to 5000 rpm, I make a way for the engine to find the extra 1000 rpm. I help the engine. And the way we help the engine is by blipping it, right? So you're on the brakes. When you start making the gear change, just before that, you're going to blip the throttle. Remember, the clutch will come in a little bit. You don't have to pull it all the way in, but it certainly has to be past the friction point of the clutch, where the engine drive is at least partially disengaged so that you reduce the load on the system during that time. Right? Which is, as I said, it gets complicated when you hear it because there's a lot of stuff going on, but on the motorcycle, it falls into place really, really easily. So stick with me here. So the idea is we are, say, half clutched. Again, half clutching for a long distance is a bad idea, but you will half clutch a motorcycle regularly when you're downshifting, where you don't really need to bring the clutch all the way to the back. So you're half clutched, you're on the brakes, and now you blip. So what happens when you blip, because you're half clutched, is your speed, physical speed doesn't change by much. If you do it correctly, it won't change at all, and that's part of the process of the technique that you're learning. But when you blip it, the revs go from 4,000 to, let's say, 6,000, because it goes whoom, that's a blip, right? Not that's acceleration, right? So you've blipped it, it's gone from 4 to 6,000 RPM, and the trick is to make the gear change and release the clutch roughly when the engine is back at about 5,000 RPM as the revs try to fall back to roughly 4,000 RPM. Did you see what we did there? We went from 4,000 RPM, we helped the engine a little bit, and we got it to 5,000 RPM and made the gear change, which means the wheel speed and the engine speed, the correlation between the two, which goes through the gearbox, remains the same, although we changed the gearing completely by selecting another part of the gearbox to use. That, in sum, is rev matching. The same process applies exactly the same way to a 2-speed, 3-speed, 4-speed, 5-speed, 6-speed gearbox. If you had a 9-speed gearbox, you'd have to blip that many times as well. What that means is if you're going from 6 to 1st, you should be able to do it with 5 blips. But blips, they sound really good, so often you will use extra blips long after you've already reached 1st because, hey, they just sound good. And when you come into a place where your friends are standing and you're pulling into a stop, going boom, boom, boom down to a stop does sound better than tick, 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 and you're coming to a stop. It is just cooler. So it's both cooler and better for your gearbox. It sounds great, and it is better for your control over the motorcycle. So honestly, there is no downside to rev matching. Now, the question that we normally get at this point is, if I have a slipper clutch, do I really need to rev match? And the answer to that is, technically, you don't need to rev match if you have a slipper clutch, especially if the slipper clutch is good enough to deal with the differences in the revs, because that's what it's there for. But as I understand it, rev matching is a good technique to learn because A, you can't guarantee that all slipper clutches will be good enough, and B, it's a good technique to learn because it's just part of riding a motorcycle well. So whether I'm riding something with a quick shifter or not, whether I'm riding something with an auto blipper or not, whether I'm riding something with a great slipper clutch or not, I will generally try to blip shift down the gearbox because I think it sounds cooler, it's better for the motorcycle, and it's an important technique to have on your side. And that's all you need to know about rev matching. If there's more questions you've got, leave us a comment. If there's other things that you think should be featured on Simplified, leave us a comment as well. Thank you so much for watching. This is PowerDrift. This is Simplified, where we take complicated automotive ideas, break them down into simple bite-sized pieces that you can digest easily. 4 buttons, that's all you have to do. In exchange, we give you this information. All we ask you to do is hit the 4 buttons for us. Thank you so much for watching.